Posso.
Hello. We're about 500.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening. Good evening, sir. Please, we're trying to just good evening.
Good evening.
Please, let's get seated. Good evening, sir. Can you hear us?
I can hear you, but not loud and clear.
Okay, so we are trying to set up. We'll start in about 2 minutes. Just can you be patient with us? Start soon.
But excuse me, why would I don't know whoever, why would you make it virtual when I'm here on campus? I'm at the guest house. Why virtual presentation?
You're free to come to the venue. It's at room 312. So
I just left there because I saw virtual presentation.
No, it's hybrid. Both, but you can join virtually and you can also be present. Actually, hybrid. So we are all here. So for the convenience of people that are not around, they can join online.
So you think I should come to the campus? I shall stay here and do what I need to do.
I don't know. Anyone who prefers that.
I'm already here. I already signed into the. I should come.
Yes, you can.
Okay,
Yes, you can. It's in the chair.
Hey, my bro. Okay, I will need some minutes to get there. Let me just come to campus, okay?
It's an African Are you also presenting?
Yeah, I like I was supposed to do this.
Okay, do you have
I'll be flash.
no, you have sent to me.
Oh.
Faculty of Remote, please.
Okay. 312. 312.
312. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Now what's the title? Fine. No, not.
It's NYU.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
So that's it.
that's it.
All right, Jeff.
Oh.
Sorry,
Everything going on.
because of virus, that's why. Okay.
But the whole thing and we speaking of touch.
All right.
Yeah.
So we are set.
Okay. And do you know if Dr. Sancho is here and presenting? So if it's not here, so then there'll be four parties that might be.
Okay. How about the one calling from?
So we're good to go.
Okay. So we can start session.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to one of the last sessions of the day. And the topic, general topic for our session is comparative African politics, nationalism, and Pan-Africanism. From what I verified, I think we have 4 speakers this afternoon, and those 4 speakers would be Dr. Ishina, who is going to speak on Pan-Africanism and diaspora politics, confronting migration, racism, and cultural identity in a globalized world. We have Dr. Ola, who is going to speak on continuities and discontinuities in African cultural identity, a transnational perspective. And we have, I think, Dr. Olanle Rajushi today, who will speak on Africa healing and the burden of scientific analysis. And that will be the first person. I will speak on IT Johnson, Pan-Africanism and nationalism in West Africa. This is how we're going to see in the presentations discussions. We'll try to follow the names as outlined in the program. Every presenter sits there 4 of us as a maximum of 15 minutes. So I'll signal to you when you have 2 more minutes in your presentation. And I'll probably give you an extra 16 minutes. But please don't try to do after 16. Because what tends to happen is that, I've said this before, is if you continue after your time up and everybody's aware your time is up, people stop listening to you. So you're speaking, but people are not actually listening to you. So please, let's try and respect the time. After this 4 presentations, the time for question and answer, and I hope that we would have a very good discussion. So let's start with the presentation.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Yeah, give you a minute. I'll set the time and wait until you start. I will formally start your time.
no. Yes, but okay, thank you, everybody. The title of the presentation is Pan-Africanism and Diaspora Politics, Confronting Migration, Racism, and Cultural Identity in the Globalized World. Well, in summary, the presentation is looking at how Pan-Africanism continues to serve as a powerful framework for understanding and addressing the complex experiences of Africans and people of African descent in the globalized world. I mean, look at the intersection of migration, racism, cultural identity, particularly within the context of global diaspora politics. Next slide, please. So, as a means of introduction, we want to talk about Pan-Africanism. The fact that we have Africans all over the world. I mean, I've been going for global connectivity. We have widespread migration. And whether we like it or not, every one of us in this room have one or two persons outside of our comfort zone. And also we have persistent social unrest. And the African diaspora continues to face complex challenges surrounding issues of identity, belonging, and systematic oppression. So across continents, you have African-centered population, they grapple with various issues of persistent racism, cultural marginalization, and exclusionary practices. So when we look at Pan-Africanism in this sense, we want to see as we imagine as a critical framework for understanding and responding to these issues, systematic racism and discrimination, cultural marginalization, exclusionary state policies. So we have growing complexity of identity and belonging when we talk about the diaspora aspect. So next slide, please. So when we talk about Pan-Africanism, ordinarily, conceptualization of Pan-Africanism has to do with a political and cultural movement for African unity and emancipation. Talk about Pan-Africanism as something that talks about all of us Africans coming together, unity of Africans, and towards colonization, a lot of issues, a lot of things came about the fact that Africans should come together, Africans should unite, and so on like that. So, well, that was the initial idea, but it continued to evolve to address shifting realities of global African realities, especially when we talk about the fact that we have a lot of Africans in the diaspora. So with the early focus on anti-colonial solidarity and integration of African states, contemporary Pan-Africanism has expanded into a transnational crisis that centers the shared struggle and aspiration of African descent peoples worldwide. So this article or this work is trying to focus on how Pan-Africanism functions as a defined political and cultural ideology within the context of diaspora politics. So we want to look at the way in which Pan-Africanist thought and activism inform collective responses to migration, racism, and identity erasure among African diaspora community. So in terms of literature review, as we know, as I said earlier, early scholarship focused on anti-colonialism and racial integration. We know W.E.B. Du Bois, Malcolm Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah, and those ones, of course, they talk about the fact that Africa must unite, Africa must work against the colonialists, Africa must be able to snatch themselves from the colonial masters. So the study of Pan-Africanism has evolved and it continues to evolve. So scholars from diverse disciplines examine ideological foundations, identity, and cultural manifestation of Pan-Africanism. Talk about the classical and contemporary Pan-Africanism with all the early researchers. They talk about origin responses to colonial oppression and racial discrimination. So these scholars, they conceptualize Pan-Africanism in terms of anti-imperialist struggles and emphasize political sovereignty, cultural pride, and continental unity. But contemporary scholars have gone beyond that. They have tried to expand the perspective of Pan-Africanism to see it as a transnational and diverse movement, which is shifting towards cultural revitalization. Things are changing, diaspora solidarity. They're talking about more equitable global distribution of power, moving beyond the traditional emphasis of political independence and integration of African nation. We're now talking about the fact that we have to recognize the complex identities and experiences of Africans wherever they are across the globe. For example, the lecture talks about modern Pan-Africanism functioning as a global discourse that transcends national boundaries and engage the plural identities of African diaspora. So issues of diaspora politics and identity formation comes in. When we talk about diaspora politics or political engagement and impact of transnational ethnic communities outside of their homeland and in their own countries, we talk about how diaspora participates in the political landscape, whether from outside to their own homeland or within the countries where they now see as home. So they took their role in elections, in lobbying, and influencing political decisions that will affect them. So it has become a key area of inquiry in African and African diaspora studies. So scholars have explored how diaspora communities continue to mobilize around shared history of displacement, colonialism, and racial exclusion, which often invoking Pan-Africanism as a source of ideological and strategic coherence. So, of course, as you said, literature continues to expand. Now, issues of global inequality and responses of Africans outside of the continent and those of the continent continue to be in the spotlight. So, migration studies highlight the various conditions faced by African migrants to global north, especially including labor migration, xenophobic violence, and systemic racism. So they continue to argue that the dynamics are shaped by racial capitalism and not real states. So the more we talk about the fact that people go out of Africa to other places, the more we see that a lot still needs to be done about and still research needs to be done about Africans and how we can unite to fight against all of these things. So the gap this study is now trying to do is to locate it within current scholarship and look at the comparative way of studying Pan-Africanism and its responses, issues of nationality and geopolitical analysis. So we want to integrate by combining discourse analysis and case studies, and also try to explore Pan-Africanism and social ideology and the crisis in diaspora politics. So for the work, we use transnationalism as a framework, which emphasizes cross-border ties. The fact that you're out does not mean that you still keep ties with your own country. In terms of a lot of things, a lot of activities happen from outside, and we continue to see how we can continue to keep hold on their relationship with the home country. Nationalism first the process by which immigrants can sustain social, political, and economic ties across national borders. So it challenges traditional paradigms that view migrants as fully assimilating to those countries or severing ties with their homeland. So they have one leg out and they have another leg in. So Pan-Africanism is seen as functioning as a transnational ideology by creating a collective consciousness rooted in the shared history of colonialism, racial subjugation, and cultural resilience. So Pan-Africanism transcends geographical and political boundaries, operating as a unifying force that connects African-descended peoples globally. So can you give me the next slide? So in terms of methodology, please one back program. So in terms of methodology, the work is quantitative and use quantitative methods. And we also use discourse analysis to examine narratives in political speech, media, and art. And we also use comparative case studies to situate African Pan-Africanism with specific national context. So the work, the scope, temporal scope is between 2016 and 2025, and speeches, political statements, media content, social media campaign, and online activism were used. And in terms of case study, we use United States of America, representing North America, and also Europe, within France and United Kingdom, in terms of post-colonial exclusion and anti-racial mobilization, and so on. So in terms of limitation, of course, it's not possible to generalize everything. So the language is also a barrier. We just want to expand to Brazil, Caribbean, and so on and that. So what is the finding in the value? The study revealed that Pan-Africanism continues to serve as a dynamic and adaptive ideology within contemporary diaspora politics. So across the United States, France, United Kingdom, African descendant communities engage with Pan-Africanist discourses to articulate shared experiences. Hello now. Next time. To articulate shared experiences of racial injustice, reclaim cultural identity, and also foster transnational solidarity. So despite different national contexts, really core themes emerge from the literature and from the field work. First has to do with resistance to systematic racism and state violence, then cultural restoration and identity formation, and also transnational solidarity and diasporic political agency. Next slide, please. So the first one, talking about resistance to racism and state violence, we see that in both the US and Europe, Pan-Africanism functions as a framework for articulating resistance against racialized state violence. In the US, you see resurgence of Pan-Africanist states within the Black Lives Matter movement, such as references to global Black unity, colonial legacies, and anti-capitalist critique. We have protest slogans like African for Africans, we are all Africans, and we have solidarity campaigns within African nations that's called the diasporic awareness of interconnected struggles. And likewise in France and the UK, diaspora communities have responded to police brutality and immigration discrimination by drawing on Pan-Africanist narratives that situate local injustice within global histories of colonialism and anti-blackness. You see the picture there, Black Lives Matters, and then we have Laverit for Adama, that is life for Adama, like justice for Adama. Adama was a 24-year-old Black French citizen of Mali who died in police custody in 2016. And also on the African Diaspora Alliance in the UK, which trade their activity within a broader Pan-African context, often invoking figures like Franz Fanon, Patrice Lumumba, to underscore the continuity of profession and the need for collective collaboration. Next slide. So another, the second aspect has to do with cultural information and identity formation. Pan-Africanism play a role of reclaiming of cultural identities. If you can click on that map, hello, please can you click on the video? Yes, there's a video there. No, down. The Cleopatra video, for many that have seen the video, it's something. Okay. For many that have seen the video, that maybe can go up there. It's about the Cleopatra girl coming from the US for the first time into Nigeria, and she's dancing go dancer. Then you see that just to show us that despite the fact that people are outside of Nigeria or outside of Africa, does not mean that the tradition will die. So in the United States, we have a percentage education, issues like film like Black Panther, and now tourism and festivals. You see the Pan-African Cultural Festival is one of the ways that Africans abroad continue to emphasize their African heritage, their diaspora connection, and cultural pride. So this effort challenge the historical erasure of Black identities and promote a sense of belonging, which is shared ancestry and values. So in Europe, we have second-generation immigrants from West and Central Africa trying to establish their cultural connection with the continents. Issues of true language, shared language, fashion, art, and dance, and also trying to push back against forced assimilation, as the case may be. So the next slide, it talks about the third one, talking about transnational solidarity and political agency. So the key feature of contemporary Pan-Africanism is capacity to cultivate transnational political consciousness and solidarity using digital platforms, Twitter, now X, YouTube, WhatsApp, serve as space for Pan-African dialogue, where activists and cultural producers share experiences and resources and strategies across borders and so on like that. I have hashtag Africa Unite, Pan-Africanism Guide, and so on like that. So Pan-Africanism also is serve as a national crisis, as the next slide shows us. It's not just an ideology, we move beyond that. I have local expression and global solidarity, and in terms of intersectionality, trying to address issues of race, gender, class, migrant status, and so on like that. So in terms of recommendation, it suggests that, well, issues of this, we need to institutionalize Pan-Africanist education, develop Afrocentric and Pan-Africanist curricula, strengthen transnational networks, trying to strengthen diaspora collaboration via digital platforms and summits, and also, next slide please, reparations of reparation and cultural production, leading effort through African Union and UN Forum to seek for reparation and global justice, and then to support diasporic media and culture, try to encouragement of funding led media, art, film, and digital. So it's okay. And next slide also, try to promote inclusive and intersectional Pan-Africanism, and then expanding research on diaspora politics. So in conclusion, well, Pan-Africanism in the 21st century talks about the fact that Pan-Africanism remains a vital force in confronting systematic racism, cultural inclusion, and also the complexity of diaspora life to balance it. Thank you for your time.
Yes, that's all. I called him in and you're not even know that.
I'm sorry, I know that's what you said.
Okay, let me take this and then you can.
Okay, I can do maybe the last 10 hours.
Okay.
No, it was not.
It was this way.
Yes, so that's the thing. I think it's.
When somebody the ECOWAS was saying that. Wait for that. You can see this slide, but so, so then everybody has 15 minutes for signal when you are at 13 minutes, and then you probably get a so far 5 presenters.
topics. Yeah, we have one so having 2 candidates. Science of public and university, and also institutions such as communities, support, and type of organizing provided. And we try to come to this to the main
Project. Just projects. Just projects.
Okay. So the topic is with African crisis. What is it was success in imposing impact norms on African countries and failing further? So giving extensive data, like everyone just talk about the GS, I mean, it was previous week now. And I mean, maybe a lot of like challenges are like something like efforts, I mean, failure, but in efforts to like survive, or it's like it was clinically recent year, first of like the breakthrough of the number of member countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. So it's happening like what sustainability and success. So I'm not saying that none of them have been claiming that in their past life are successful in imposing democratic norm in African countries, particularly like keeping the research base in like West Africa. So I think it's going to be topical like issues like say very recent times in this recent debate. So I'm going to have, I mean, as it was pretty successfully, I mean, because of like failure to maintain or retain or three member countries, now those three countries form like AGS known as Alliance of Sciences. At the same time, so I'm not going to have as efforts of coming successfully imposing democratic norms, so I feel successfully giving like the recent failure. So I mean to maintain about 3 members of ECOWAS. So my question is, why is ECOWAS successfully? I mean, I've been successfully imposing democratic norms in recent time, but have they failed? So I use my example methodology, I like to use the combination of my material, like trying to engage in, I mean, this to post ECOWAS website, and only engaging in primary materials, such as ECOWAS documents, reports, communique, and secondary sources, such as academic literature, media reports, and online news, just to engage, I mean, to see or to assess whether ECOWAS are successful or they failed in the same time. I'm just a brief, I mean, context of time background. I mean, when the first was created, ECOWAS never like, I mean, never had intention like for holding countries for democratic values and principles or pursue, but also like, I mean, nature of violence in Africa, particularly between the like 1980s and 1990s. So there been a lot of challenges regarding like, conflicts in various West African countries. So ECOWAS was never had a lot of focusing on democratic values. Their plan was just like maintain stability because of the conflict all over like most of West African countries. So I think like look at ECOWAS when they started like focusing on democratic values and principles, but that never like that never been like made focus to engage in democratic values and principles. Their plan was just focus on stability because there was Liberian war, there was like war in various West African countries. So now I think okay, when ECOWAS can focus on democratic values and principles, and then that's also able to uphold these principles and values. So in 2001, before the adoption of Statutory Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance, in December 2001, ECOWAS led of statements in Benin in 1993 to their claim in establishing the Economic Community of African States, signed in Lagos on May
5 minutes. That's politics. We have adopted our Edgeman's exit reality and voice framework to serve as
So 14 of the ECOWAS members, head of state government, signed this protocol in Dakar in 2001 in Senegal. After this principle is also referred to as the protocol ASP1 on democracy and good governance. So it is a manifestation of the ECOWAS member states renewed political will to advance the process of averting and any violent conflicts as well as achieving peace and security via advancement of democracy and responsible governance. So why therefore ECOWAS like we consider like to focus on upholding democratic principles and values? So there are some debates that necessitated the adoption of the ECOWAS principle ASP 2001 that was signed in Dakar in 2001. So first, given that 13 West African nations were put by military administration between 1983 and 1989, out of about 50 to 60 members, about 13 of them were ruled by military between 1983 and 1989. And secondly, beginning of 1990s was characterized by a dramatic increase in the process of democratization, which coincided with the growth of national conferences in numerous countries and in dramatic decline in the number of regimes under military control. And the first reason why this principle was adopted was because then the only ECOWAS nation, which was a functioning government in 1999, was the outcome of the military takeover. Just like we have Burkina Faso now, where we have like the West Africa, that the Burkina Faso in a democratic government, and now it's doing well, especially doing well, and many of people love him. And also the final reason is several of the divisional of states who were in office were former military officers who transitioned to civilian life either before or after assuming office or inheriting the governance. So it's the various factors that necessitated the adoption of the principle of the AS 2001. And I'm like, okay, when everyone began to like focus on the democratic principle, have been successful. I'm like, in terms of assessment, upholding these values and principles, in terms of their success. So major changes to the integration and development agenda were brought about by 1983 vision of the ECOWAS 13 in Benin, which 13 decision-making bodies established appropriate mechanism for preventing and resolving conflicts. So the law then adopted again something on democracy and good governance in December 2001. So it declared that member states must show zero tolerance for power obtained or maintained by unconstitutional means, and that every accession to power must be free, fair, and transparent election. That was what everyone focused on, like free and fair election, rather than like military to power and possible take power of power by this men in khaki. So I like to ask the question: why is ECOWAS successful in imposing democratic norms and able to resolve conflicts? So ECOWAS have that with the ECO monk that actually is like, I mean, somewhat like their intervention and how they need to like restore peace and stability within their member state. I try to use that as success metrics today, but just to have that ECOWAS has not really failed. But I mean, that's not like its failure that's going to hold some successive accounts and credit them for that. So I like to look at like from 1990, that is like Civil War, and also 1997, the Sierra Leone Civil War. And 1999, beginning the start as well, it was complete. Then from 2003, there was a Civil War as well. Then in 2003 again, there was like bigger Civil War, then Catholic Civil War. Then in Guinea-Bissau, in 2012, in Mali, in 2013, in Burkina Faso in 2015, and in 2017 in Gambia. So everyone have been prepared to restore democratic principles and values, particularly in 2017 when Yahya Jammeh refused to like relinquish power. I mean, they have like said, former president of Nigeria, part of the like high power country that was sent like to appease Yahya Jammeh to relinquish power to Adama Barrow, which was like the only president of Gambia. So I'd like to look at ECOWAS activities and give to the next slide. So I'd like to look at ECOWAS, to look at ECOWAS activities from 1990 to 2002 to show that ECOWAS might like have some challenges and some like issues now, but you have like refer to them, you have to put them in slacks. And like just for that they need to uphold some principles and values over time. For instance, in Liberia in 1990, a peacekeeping force was sent to end the civil war in the country. The mission was, despite that, the mission was accused of human rights violation. Again, in 1988, in Syria alone, President Ahmed Shabar was reinstated after ECOWAS intervened in the country's war to get out a junta and liberate allies from the capital, town. I mean, from 1990 to 2022, which was appeared to be a recent event, military personnel were to help in life in country after it failed. So that I mean, that can use this to account like what was the success of ECOWAS and how they're able to like restore peace and stability in their member countries. Though you said the should not be only that information to measure if ECOWAS to be successful or not. So the instead then ECOWAS failure in upholding democratic norms. So in Mali has experienced like the number of democratic functions in their power. For instance, in August 2020 and in May 2021, there was military incursion in Mali, and also in Niger in August 2023, and also in Burkina Faso between January and August 2022. Burkina Faso had about 2 military incursions in power. And also in Guinea-Bissau, in September 2021, there was incursion, and in Cote d'Ivoire, between 2010 and 2011, ECOWAS has failed to uphold democratic principles and values. Also in Togo in 2005, and again in the report in 2020. So this idea was like no acts or setback that ECOWAS has had, and they failed in order to uphold democratic values and principles, despite the success they had in intervening and restoring peace and stability in member countries. So from my analysis of various primary sources from ECOWAS website and community, so I realize that there are some factors responsible for the failure of ECOWAS, despite the success system countries. For instance, ECOWAS failed to introduce term limits, and between 2010 and 2017, there seems to be a sort of stability. I mean, no West African country was under military rule. Then, during the heyday of the success of ECOWAS, they have introduced term limits in their member countries. They perhaps countries with use that tradition to impose values and stability. But because of this, I think this heyday of success of ECOWAS, they have failed to introduce term limits, account for why you have a categories of failure and everyone just waking up overnight and taking it over power. And we see it in the number of member countries. And so another failure of ECOWAS is Western influence. Now we have the spread of China, Russia intervening in African politics from the likes of, the US African countries like Nigeria, Kenya, we have China, interfering just their domestic affairs. We have to ensure policies that will favor them. So we can't dismiss the role, we can't dismiss the hand of Western influences, particularly China, the US, and also Russia in some of these military incursions that we have in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and Niger. Also, internal dynamics and ECOWAS passivity. For instance, during the ESAS in 2020, ECOWAS then there was violation of human rights from police brutality. I'm not sure ECOWAS ordered give any order or any communities to contain such atrocities contained by Nigerian police. And so outright violation of democratic values that which ECOWAS failed to interfere or to chime in on. Also, we have an example of ECOWAS double standard and hypocrisy. We have some ECOWAS criticizing we have some democratic schools where we have some democratic presidents. They stay in power for long and for third term, 3 terms, 4 terms, in Togo, also in various African countries, ECOWAS is to condemn them, and we have them to come over power. Also in the effect of all those sanctions or imposition. For instance, when Niger, just the last factor, because of the time, when ECOWAS failed, when it was in Niger, ECOWAS failed to, and ECOWAS were other Nigeria, I think then, President who was the chairman of ECOWAS, then he had they going to threaten Niger, but Niger didn't see threat as anything. They see that threat as a big follow, and because of that, they felt maybe they have to get them. Then because they didn't see ECOWAS as the very big, and that could weigh additional effects on them. That's why they felt to eat ECOWAS threats and sanctions. So these are some of the factors that are considered as ECOWAS failure as a record to uphold democratic values and principles, was able to accredit them for in the past the guys that restore democratic principles and value after they introduced the ECOWAS ASP 2001, which was signed in Dakar. So despite that failure, of course, ECOWAS has succeeded in upholding democratic principles and values in the past. Thank you so much for your
So we have a
yeah, so
Okay, everyone. Yeah, and the paper that I'm presenting exploits. My name is Folabi Montayo from the University of Lagos here. The title of my paper is Continuities and Discontinuities in African Cultural Identity, a Transnational Perspective. Okay, and this paper explores how This paper explores how African cultural identity evolves in transnational context, using music as both a lens and a language of cultural negotiation. African communities, still in my introduction, African communities have always negotiated a delicate balance between tradition and change. This negotiation becomes even more pronounced in transnational contexts, where African migrants and their descendants encounter new cultural landscape. Now, rather than losing a Islamic identity, these communities often mix. So what are we trying to say here is that see our musicians in diaspora, instead of them, after leaving the borders of this country, different African countries and there, instead of them losing their identity, learn music, which is their power, and what they do, it's instead of losing it, they rather remix, they bring a remix into their music. So where African migrants and these descendants encounter a new cultural landscape. Now, like I said, that rather than simply losing or preserving identity, these communities often remix. And music is one of the most powerful ways they do this. So this presentation explores how musical trends like Afrobeats, Fuji, and Nollywood soundtrack express both continuities and discontinuities in cultural identity among African diasporical population. So what's the aim of this paper? It's to examine how African transnational communities negotiate cultural continuity and change, with a focus on the role of music as a medium of identity, construction, and cultural memory. And so the objective that this paper is looking at is to explore, one, how musical trends like Afrobeats, Fuji, and Nollywood soundtrack reflect both traditional African cultural values and global influence. Two, to also investigate how transnational African communities use music to maintain cultural identity in diasporic setting. It's another aim we're seeing is to analyze the tension between inherited cultural practices and pressures of modernization in transnational context, and also to contribute to scholarly discourse on cultural adaptation, identity formation, and function of art in transnational African experiences. Okay, so the methodology is this research adopts a qualitative interdisciplinary methodology drawing from ethnomusicological, cultural studies, and migration studies. Now we see the data collection, that is interview between these African diasporic musicians, the cultural practitioners, and the community members in select transnational contexts. Example is in UK, US, and Canada. The participants' observation at cultural festivals, concerts, and communities events where African music is performed as consumed, content analysis of musical lyrics, themes, and instruments used in Afrobeat, Fuji, and Nollywood soundtrack. And then the analytical approach, geometrical analysis to identify patterns of continuity and change, discourse analysis to interpret how language and music reflects identity negotiation, comparative analysis between traditional musical forms and their national adaptation. The theoretical framework that this paper is hinged on, the study is hinged on, is whole theory of cultural identity, and the theoretical lens, is the theoretical from which I'm looking at this study is in three different perspectives, looking at to run this discussion, I drew on three key ideas, and the three key ideas are, the continuity, music, and cultural memory. Looking at one, African communities have always negotiated a delicate balance between tradition and change. this negotiation becomes even more pronounced in transnational contexts where African migrants and their descendants encounter a new landscape. That is, you see our musicians, when they leave the borders of this country, they travel out of the country, and then they are faced with, retaining their identity. They don't want to lose their identity. I am still on Naija, you understand? So because I'm here among you, I won't lose my identity now. So you know what they do is this. There's not an hybrid. They mix, the kind of music they do. They add R&B, infuse it with the Afro beat, and you discover that even, the whites, a lot of the Europeans, really embrace it that, oh, this is good. So what are we trying to say? Looking at the theme, discontinuities and continuity. Oh, at some point, if I'm able to discontinue part of this, as I'm composing my music, I must also ensure that as I've left my fatherland, in the white man's land, do you understand? I should also be able to retain my identity as, an African. As an African, you don't want to lose your identity. So rather than simply losing or preserving identities, these communities often remix, and music is one. I think I've said that. So music, sorry, forgive me, my slide is just moving up and down. So in diasporic African communities, music often serves as a repository of tradition. We see that our people over there, when they hit Nigeria and they want to do their wedding, I don't know if you've been able to see some of these weddings, these European weddings, whereby you see the Oyibos, they will wear their agbadas, you understand? And then you see their langa is trying to say, they don't even know what they're saying. They still do. And we have our musicians, still retaining that Yoruba thing, play their song, and then still telling us, no, we're in your land, no, but this is our culture. We can't lose our identity. And then the music is not just entertainment. It helps the diasporans maintain linguistic ties, spiritual practices, and historical memory. Lyrics in Yoruba or Igbo, for instance, sustain language used across generations. These performances create a sense of home away from home. In this way, music becomes a form of cultural preservation. We can see how music is helping to preserve our culture. Using music as a tool. Our musicians in diaspora are doing their best that yes, we are still going to retain our identity as Africans. The African, yes, this is who we are. Now the discontinuity, which is adaptation and global influence. Taking a look at, I had to get another laptop to ensure that I'll be able to do this. I will be able to project the songs of T.Y. Savage, Burna Boy, Whiskey, and the rest like that. So, looking at what diaspora also brings is continuity. You understand? When you're outside your homeland, somehow the musicians realize that their music is being influenced. You understand? You can't just do the whole thing. There has to be some infusion of beats that will really make your music appeal to them, even though you are no longer in their land. You will also see that this way it goes. You can see some of them. I think the last NSA we did, I saw one, a white telling me, taking permission. She said, oh, she's going to the market. She said, what have you gone to? She said, Adire. She kept saying she wants to go and get Adire. Though they know that, yes, for us to accept them fully, they're trying to tell us somehow that, see, we also, we identifying with you by what we are wearing. So take Afrobeats, not to be confused. Let's take Afrobeat now, not to be confused with fella Afrobeats. So the modern trend blends African rhythm with hip hop, R&B. In our days, back then, those are days. Our musicians like Sonia Ade, Ebenezer Obey. If you see, they are still retaining their own kind of music. But if you look at Sonia Ade's song, who is now fully into music, you will see a blend, of Afro. You see a blend of Afro fusion. You understand? The Western thing coming in play. Do you understand? So that's where we are seeing how there's some discontinuities. So my father did it like this. That's me and now. This is how my father, is Afrobeat. Now he's bringing why is now bringing a fusion of Afrobeat and the Western thing coming into it. So we like artists like Burna Boy, Whiskey, and
caters to global audience, often integrating English language. See some of those songs. No be my own, no, you get and what things like that. They bring a blend of Pidgin, bring a blend of Yoruba, just to ensure that they are not losing their identity. So similarly, Nollywood soundtracks have shifted. You and I know that our Nollywood soundtracks have shifted from what it used to be, like the days of Pade Yoloro. When you hear Dabarama, it's not different now. You know what you now have in the soundtrack, you see some blend of R&B in the music. So our Nollywood soundtrack has shifted from purely indigenous sounds to include jazz, trap, and pop influences. So these changes reflect not just globalization, but also a younger generation negotiating what it means to be African in the 21st century. So we see not a, so what we see here is not a loss of culture, but a transformation. A creative discontinuity, right? Can I just pass to that? So what we're also seeing here is that the kind of fusion does not erase cultural heritage. So that's the changes that have been embraced, the continuities. What is being discontinued, you understand? And then the continuation of, we are still there. This is we, Africans we have. This is our song. We are known for this, our juju, our food. So as a discontinued song, part of their lyrics and whatever, you will discover that there is still a continuation. There's still a continuation. It's not a total, it's not that they're totally erasing, the African thing. So the kind of fusion does not erase cultural heritage, not at all. It reinvents it. So music as a resistance and renewal. It is important to recognize music as a site of resistance. From Fela Kuti's critics of Nigeria military regime to Burna Boy commentary on post-cultural African music often challenges injustice and reclaim cultural pride. So in diaspora, this becomes even more urgent. Artists use music to restrict racial, stereotyping, affirm Black identity, and protect exclusion. Platforms like Spotify, YouTube, and TikTok have amplified these messages globally. So in conclusion, so music does not just reflect culture. As you and I can see, music does not just reflect culture, it shapes it, it shapes it. It becomes a way to survive, speak back, and dream forward. And so I conclude by saying that African music in transnational context reveal both continuity and discontinuity. It preserves it preserves the tradition while embracing transformation. You can see where the discontinuity and the continuity is. So it helps individuals and communities negotiate identity in motion. And it plays a vital role in cultural resilience, expression, and resistance, rather than seeing continuity and discontinuity as opposites. We must understand them as coexisting forces in a dynamic cultural process. African music doesn't just migrate, it evolves. And in doing so, it teaches us that identity is not fixed, but always becoming. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we are a little over 30 minutes. There are two presenters left now. I'm going to do the chair thing. Dr. Shitobe, would you want to go next? And do you promise me that you're going to keep your presentation between 12 and 15 minutes? I'm going to spend 5 minutes because it would be fair enough to get people to ask questions since you sound patient. But we're getting to the point where I think for those of us who are presenters, we have to curtail our presentations a little. Five people on a panel is not a form of organization. It doesn't work in 90 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you. The promise is I'll let you to when you be my guy. Okay. So because I'm not gonna pick that time. Okay, I say good evening to everybody. I can't project myself. If I can't, that's not going to let's waste time.
Sorry?
If I can't project it, well, let's waste time with that.
Oh, that would take a lot of time. Okay, this is how we first start.
Presentation as I clear in the conference titled Africa's Daily Scientific Analysis. Basically, it speaks to sickness, illness, that like in continent of Africa. So we need to go into details. We all know that our continent is sick, our continent is healed, and it's healed. So out of the sickness, why would our politicians, why would they be concerned about themselves and not about the people they promise to serve? That is the sickness. Sometimes some of us, when they come out, they wonder, places we live. I don't live in Africa, but I come to Africa time. So I see things and I wonder, what is wrong? You go to the hospital, you still see this sickness there. Maybe the nurse don't want to do a job, and if they have to do it, they just, she has to make noise, shout at people, and at the end of the day, what she is meant to do is being defeated. But when you shout at people that are sick, what do you expect? You expect the sickness to go away or so the sickness is everywhere. You want to look at a developmental, situation in terms of infrastructural development, in terms of personnel, in terms of copying what many of us want to call brain drain, and like a philosopher would say, if all the brilliant mind decides not to teach us, then don't be surprised. If you have somebody to be the teachers of the children, that is a big one for that should be a big one for anyone that says about our society. So the sickness goes on and on. The list is endless. I can be complicated. So my paper directly is interested in talking about healing. How does the continent heal from this sickness? How does the continent heal from this sickness? Anyway, what makes this treatment persist most of the time, which are identified as scientific analysis? Okay, because we go to anywhere, any sector, is about, we are trying to, have the global standard, the global standard. Excuse me, what do you mean by the global standard? We may not even need the global standard. We need the local standard. Let's deal with the local standard. So this idea of trying to be like them, in quote, this idea of trying to be like them is what my paper referred to as the body of scientific analysis. Because I'm not excluding myself, of course, I'm also admitting I'm speaking English right now, right? When I'm supposed to be communicating Yoruba language fluently without any problem. There's no way I want to speak in English, there's no way I do know that the native English speakers also do not speak good English sometimes. Okay, but they speak their mother tongue and they understand themselves. Okay, so we are not victims of the problem we are talking about. So, what is the ill? Yes, my paper is not rejecting scientific analysis in totality. Of course, it is used because it tells us or talks to us about objectivity, and of course, quantification, and of course, empirical analysis, in order to have what we call exactness, okay, when we deal with issues, particularly human issues. But beyond objectivity, beyond quantification, how else do we approach the problem? This is where my paper talks about what many of us call indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge. So my paper, speaks to the fact that we need to not just embrace scientific analysis or scientific models as we want to. We need to pick the ones, the part of that's going to be useful. We need to focus more on indigenous law. And the reason is simple. It doesn't cost us much. In fact, it's going to eradicate in a very greater percentage. It's going to eradicate what's corruption, the political corruption that we have, the economic corruption. That's part of the problem itself. So with indigenous knowledge, I'm blending it with the part of the aspects of scientific models. We can begin to have solutions to many of the problems in different sectors of society. We can begin to have solutions to a problem. For example, I want to go personal. For example, some years back, I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed of pre-diabetes. My wife took me to the hospital. She forced me there. I appreciate that she forced me there. And then it was diagnosed that I'm pre-diabetes. And I was given insulin to inject. My wife was insisting, you have to use the insulin. I said, okay, no problem. And so some of you that are familiar with diabetic patient, don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat this. Oh God. She started feeding me with leaves. And I was that, and I told her, do you want me dead or you want me here? I said, I don't want you dead. Okay, good. I don't want to eat. I want to eat food, real food. See the insulin, I'm going to use it for to eat. But unfortunately, I used the insulin because she wanted it. I think 2 days. And by the third day, I didn't use it because the insulin was already affecting my sight. It was already affecting my sight seriously. And I said, I'm not going to use this stuff. I don't care how much you got it. I'm going to use it. So I started. So luckily for me, I made a friend at the store and she said, oh, what? I said, what are you using? I said, I'm not using it. That's something you can use, from Nigeria. Look at me. So really, but the order is not precise. It doesn't matter. The solution is what matters. Leave the order. So anyway, she gave me that, and within 2 days, changes started occurring. The blood sugar went down drastically from about 500 plus to about 170. And moving forward, I got other local stuff. I called people in the brand. Look, this is my situation. I need apps. I need this. And that's not the problem. It's a little thing. And I met the brother and I said, look, this thing I'm giving, I want to use it a week or two. Consume anything, even if it's food, just consume. And since then, I've been better. This is the solution to diabetes, for diabetes.
African solution.
I don't even want to call it an African. You know why? I'm sorry. It is because we are not embracing this knowledge. We are not projecting this knowledge. As a matter of fact, these people come to our continent, grab some of this knowledge, indigenous knowledge, go back to where they come from, turn it around, and begin to make money. And we begin to embrace it as if this is their idea. This is the problem. And we got it from Western world. Of recent, I was reading about Chinese government suing the people in America for copying their stuff for advert. And they said, this is bush. You tend to see something from us, and you are suing them for copying your advert, print. I said, no. Everybody knows globally that advert is indigenous to. I get happy. So they have come. I wasn't too young when the Chinese people was coming around. Go into our localities, they need to talk to people, and they need to steal ideas. I wasn't too young. They were doing that. I was witnessing. So the whole thing is that, the whole argument is that science is okay. Scientific model is fine, but we only need the ones that helps our indigenous knowledge. So if we only need one that helps, and that is what my paper, my presentation is all about. We need to learn. So let me just there is need for us to embrace African indigenous knowledge, and use a scientific part of scientific models that helps us develop this knowledge into helping our society better, make progress. And in a way, indigenous scientific knowledge can also even help to address the problem of corruption. As a matter of fact, see the politicians, that's why when you say why can't you use Ogun or Amadioha, use Ogun Amadioha to swear you into office. They won't. They won't. What stops the politicians? Like I was just yesterday, I came to my it's like, notice. See, the only solution to our political problem with our politicians is simple. Let them legalize arms. They just legalize arms. All of these Boko Haram, they were killing with disappear. Politicians will sit right. The American politician is sitting right, not because they want to sit right, but because it knows that anybody can come up with gun and shoot, just like what happened in Minnesota some days ago or some weeks ago. So they sit tight because they know somebody will come for them if they misbehave, because they know somebody will surely come for them if they misappropriate funds. It doesn't mean they don't misappropriate funds, but they don't joke with allocations, financial allocations that is meant to develop the people, that is meant to help the people, that is meant to support the people. So this is what paper is all about. And finally, I have stated that drawing from various tradition and perspective, even seen as a genre that honors both knowledge and memory, science and spirit. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have about 18 minutes to go. I'm going to limit my presentation to about 8 or 9 minutes maximum, so that will be about 10 minutes. So what you have to do is I want you to just show up like 2 slides. So first, so this is what my talk is about, and it's focused on this month, IT Wallet Johnson. How many people in this room know IT Wallet Johnson? How do you know IT Wallet Johnson?
I think it was a nationalist.
He was a nationalist. How many people in this room know Nnamdi Azikiwe? Of course, everybody knows Nnamdi Azikiwe. Everybody in this room, how many people in this room know Kwame Nkrumah? Of course, everybody knows Kwame Nkrumah. How many people in this room know Jomo Kenyatta? Everybody knows Jomo Kenyatta. So there was a time in history, when if you are going to pick out the 5 most prominent people in the anti-colonial movement, this man would be among them. To a certain extent, this man was somebody that was regarded as a senior to Kwame Nkrumah. He was also a fellow traveler. That is, he worked with Nnamdi Azikiwe for almost 7 years in Ghana. You know that Nnamdi Azikiwe was in Ghana. Published in Nnamdi Azikiwe's newspaper in Ghana, the Morning Post, was actually indicted together with Nnamdi Azikiwe for writing what the British considered a very seditious article. So I wanted to start with that because today nobody seems to remember it. And my claim in this paper, my overall claim in this paper, is about history and memory and about how we forget. And in many cases in Africa, we are very short-memory. It comes from Sierra Leone. It's remembered in Sierra Leone. It's not remembered in Nigeria. It's not remembered in Ghana. It's not remembered in the Gambia, where I just came from. And I found that the British had an entire file on him, that they were tracking his movement and his politics in West Africa. This was how significant it was. It's that you go to various archives, from the archives in London to the archives in Sierra Leone, archives in Ghana. I've not yet gone to the Nigerian archive, but I bet you in Ghana, when the archive came out, I was pleasantly surprised to see this entire file that he kept on the next slide, because this is the most important. Next. So this is the most important slide. If I had 15 minutes, this was what my talk was going to be about. I was going to tell you about Akuna Wallace Johnson, about Wilberforce, a liberated African village. Liberated Africans in Sierra Leone were people of enslaved descent who were gathered all over West and Central Africa and returned and landed in Sierra Leone between 1830 to the 1880s. Akuna, by the way, some of you recognize the name, is because his parents came from Nigeria. A lot of people came from Nigeria. My grandfather came from Nigeria and was resettled in Sierra Leone. Well, what that meant is that this was somebody, like most liberated Africans, people at the end of the 19th century, was produced within that crucible of enslavement, of anti-slavery, and then landed in Sierra Leone and then functioned and lived their lives mostly under colonialism. Based on the presentations, what colonialism did to us, depending on where you want to start your history, colonialism dispersed us, but also colonialism created a framework for us to circulate. To circulate between the various empires. And by circulating between the various empires, some of the presentations that you've just done is it for those of us, for Africans who have been separated in the crucible of slavery, colonialism made it possible for them to make conversation and to engage in anti-colonial politics. Second, which of those steps, what I wanted to spend the time, this is a man, the reason why, when I mentioned the other people, you spoke, you knew the other people, because these were all university educated people, not so. These were people who got degrees. Yeah, these were all university educated people. And in most parts of Africa, it's the educated elite who went to universities, in many cases, who became presidents and prime ministers of colonial Africa. This man never went to a university. But well, the British put in their colonial archives that he was an inveterate troublemaker, that he produced everywhere he went. He did 2 or 3 things. One, he set up and worked with trade unions. Second, he set up newspapers and used those newspapers to attack British colonialism. This was R.P. Nkrumah and all of the Pan-Africanists that we knew met. Just 2 quick things to round up and what got me interested in this. So we don't remember him, but in Sierra Leone is remembered. Remember, his name is on the currency. You go to the city council, there's a picture, there's a bust of him in the city council, and there are 3 secondary schools named that time. There's also a beach named that time. I'll also show you the picture. Later, so in Sierra Leone is remembered, but not remembered very deeply. Just as I've asked this question, if I've asked many Sierra Leoneans, they know the name, but they don't remember his politics. They don't remember the history behind him. They don't remember the stature that he had, especially in the 1930s and 1940s. That also speaks to what is the historiography. Those of you who are historians in the book know what historiography is. This is what people have written about other people. Not so? What people have written about other people. Wallace Johnson appears everywhere. It appears everywhere. But it doesn't, except one PhD thesis, nobody has decided to write a book about it. This is a man that has an extensive, a very rich life. The British were terrified when they during the Second World War. The British had to detain him for all throughout the Second World War because they were afraid that he would engage in politics that would destabilize the kind of support that the British wanted to have. So everywhere if you're reading about the movement, you're reading about, you're reading about human character, Wallace Johnson pops up. But usually it doesn't get the full attention. I have done a lot of interviews, including interviewing Wallace Johnson's last remaining daughter and son in Sierra Leone, so I'm in the process of putting the monograph. You can just go through the slide very quickly. So this is the church that he went to. Next slide. This is one of the papers that he edited. Next slide. This was the West African Youth League. one of the most dynamic anti-colonial organizations that is founded before the Second World War. Most anti-colonial history, the history of nationalism, for those of you who taught history, the history of nationalism says that nationalism took off its stride after the Second World War. Studying with Johnson says no. 1930s, Bobby Johnson, I already looked at the British and said it's time for them to go. Next slide. This comes from African Standard. Next slide. Famous 1945 Pan-African Congress. That was a turning point in the struggle for African independence. It was one of the big jobs. If you look very closely, and we don't have time, you could see Kwame Nkrumah at the back. Yeah, that's Kwame Nkrumah there. Yeah. Next slide. That's what Johnson. Next slide. These are the ways in which he's remembered in Sierra Leone. I wish I had more time, but I don't. At least we have 10 more minutes. So any questions? Let's take a couple of questions. One. Any other person that has questions? 2, 3. Okay, so let's go with the 3 questions.
Right. Thank you for the well-presented presentation. My first question goes to Dr. Making, Dr. David Joe. So you were talking about ECOWAS and democratic norms in West Africa. And you mentioned that at first, the initial stage, ECOWAS was not focused on democratic governance, on enabling democratic finance towards the region or sub-region, but it was focused on ensuring stability. So what was the mechanism? How did ECOWAS intend to foster stability if it was not considering democratic governance? What were the other measures that we had then? Before the So the question is, you talk about ECOWAS not enacting some policies on the West African states. That is, those that done that, maybe those states where you have junta taking over, they wouldn't have taken over. So I wanted to mention that you think that the issue of sovereignty would be a factor for ECOWAS, for ECOWAS not interfering or not enacting this policy as the state. States claim that they have sovereignty without political independence. So that would have been a factor.
So
Thank you everyone for your presentation. Okay, so I want to talk about, let me start with the last presenter. Yeah, it's apparent that there's a lot of gap in history and capturing history of the heroes of Africa. For instance, I find a fundamental gap in the place of women in this history of Pan-Africanism. Thank you. The presenter, Shitabe, okay, now so you are advocating for indigenous solutions to problems that have not been captured. But my challenge with that is that a lot of things about African is hidden. For instance, I have observed something basic. We are beginning to fall into a drug abuse crisis. And I keep asking the indigenous people that mix herbs here and there, are there no herbs that can help solve drug abuse? Because detoxification internationally is very expensive. Thirdly, I want to talk to Bolaji Omoniyi. You talked about identity and music. Though I don't know if your topic did really, because what you were talking about, I don't know if maybe that's your perspective, so I can leave it at that. But basically, I want to come in the fact that, for instance, you talk about music and identity in the diaspora. And I think there's something that captures that maybe you need to also look into the place of instruments. The place of instruments, because you find out that culturally, people are attached to certain instruments. If you're an Igbo person and you begin to play that their flute here, they will jump up automatically. And I keep wondering, what is it in their psyche that's attached to such instruments? Thank you
very much.
Thank you, sir. Presentation. Of course, there's a African history, and I'm wondering if we have such people on the group, history. Talking about Johnson, children and Go about this. And then you now talk about how that you have meeting for many children. And you have a book in the pipeline?
Yes, so that's the easy answer. Let me take a follow-up question and then give everybody a minute to respond. There's a follow-up question.
Okay. So, Kanayo Numbe, you have the permission to speak now.
Make it short, please.
All right, thank you. My question is for Bolaji Omoni, and she was talking about diaspora music making. So I was actually wondering I was wondering what drives this remix in diaspora music making. Is it the economic rationality or is it just identity? I don't see how to put economics into perspective, but I think that most of the people who make this music also consider how this music appeal to their current environment and as well where they are living. So I'm trying to understand how we can, integrate economic rationality into this music making in the diaspora.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so everybody has a minute. We don't have to answer all the questions very quickly, so I'll give everybody time so we can handle. So a minute, let's go.
Yeah, it's more important, like, between, just so, aside question. I feel like you have to between legends of the one, like, what the first major have in place, like, to feel it now. I feel like you do what really like inflation and usually, economic components, like, usually made of people was really months like with stop sustainability. So I think just transfer the end of months like stop sustainability. And second question about sovereignty and limitation on why ECOWAS going to play like a key period of this state of countries. I think like it's nothing like actually sovereignty. We have like we have power and power system mind and some power. Another version like to use that like interfere on the completely disappear. Rather just like giving sort of actual sovereignty and then care like affect this appear. That power measures like we saw power in police this decision. Yes, thanks very much.
Or the African instrument they are trying to say is that these instruments are not just they are cultural agents. You understand that? Oh, these are musical instruments, like the Igbo thing you said. Do you understand? Like you said, if they are being played over there, that's it's attractive. I didn't really draw on the instruments, like you were trying to bring my attention to that. But the truth we know that when you talk about music, you're also talking about the instruments that goes along with it. And for the economic thing that the man is trying to say, it's like our Nigerian musicians going out there, they know that man will survive. Do you understand? There was recently we were asking ourselves that where is Lagbaja? I don't know how many of you know Lagbaja. When last did you hear about Lagbaja's music? Lagbaja went to the diaspora thinking that that's where people over there, not knowing that even Nigerians appreciate it more. Yeah. Nigerians are, but it's nowhere to be found because someone is going over there, losing his own identity. It's music that we all enjoy. You understand? I'm going over there to losing what the real original thing that everybody knows about. Most of our musicians in diaspora has this mindset of man must survive, and thereby trying to now revive other, having other. What we call it now?
Yes, quick passing word from tradition.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Yep, and straight quick passing word.
The solution to drug abuse is not it's universal. Okay. But when you talk about detoxification, of course there are apps. You can meet me, I have one and give you 2 hours. Okay, I think I answered that question. But drug abuse, I think is a universal point there now with you.
So thank you everybody, small but very good session, and the young people here, thank you very much for your patience.
You did mention the
This is the one. This is the one.